What did you do yesterday evening? I expect some of you came home from work quite tired and slopped down on the sofa with your family in front of the TV. It's, only about 10:30, so some of you are probably nursing sore heads still after a few too many pints with your friends in the local. I sat pretty nervously at home with my partner, going through increasingly ridiculous ways that this could go wrong today. It's us, me, and the break. There were some amazing ones, and we'll see if they happen. But jokes aside, there's a commonality here. For the most part, I expect that we were with other people. It might be someone who you love very much. It might be someone who really irritates you immensely. But my bet is that you'll have had at least one social interaction during the course of your day. And that's because social interactions are the currency of humankind. From the start, newborn babies look longer at faces, at pictures of facial features, than at images of features all mixed up. Well before they can speak, they start to engage in turn-taking conversations with other adults and other caregivers, babbling, etc., just showing that really from birth, there is an innate predisposition towards social interaction. We need social interaction in order to learn how to emotionally self-regulate. I'll tell you about someone called Henry. He's one of my clients, and he could be one of many people. Henry really struggles to emotionally self-regulate. He finds his emotions overwhelming, very powerful, and he'll do anything he can to avoid them. He'll drink, he'll take substances, he'll lash out at people. When Henry was younger, his parents were quite absent. His mother didn't really soothe him when he cried. She tended to leave him or respond quite kind of unpredictably to his distress. He needed someone to teach him how to deal with those emotions, to lift him out of his crib and to label them, define them and identify them for him, showing him how to deal with them. And that's where the social interaction was necessary. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, Henry as an adult also really struggles to form relationships with other people. He distances himself from people. He says he doesn't need anyone. But in therapy sessions, we'll talk about how alone he feels, how there's that kind of unshakable feel of emptiness inside him. Henry's attachment style, which is the inbuilt model that we carry all the way from the start through life, and how we relate to other people, was also based on those unpredictable and sometimes not there early relationships. So this is what happens when we have unusual levels of social interaction from birth. But how about when they're pretty much not there at all? Children in the Romanian orphanages have been shown to actually have different structures in their brains compared to other more typically developing children. They have enhanced fear and emotional processing centers, and this leads to all kinds of difficulties in terms of cognitive problems, behavioral difficulties, emotional sensitivities throughout their lives. You can just see here how the early social environment actually shapes their physiological correlates in their brain. So this is how we need social development and social interaction in terms of early development. But how about how it's related to the development and diagnoses of mental health difficulties? That's the names that we give the clusters of symptoms that people experience, 1 in 4, according to the statistic. There is so much evidence to link the two, so I'll name just a few. It's related to their prevalence. In the general population, about 1 in 10 people will report feeling lonely most of the time or all of the time. Now that's a really horrible statistic. But in a mental health population, that figure is 2/3. It's linked to the recovery rate. People take longer to recover from an episode of depression if they're feeling socially isolated than if they're socially connected. It's often linked to the condition itself. Diagnoses such as social phobia or agoraphobia, which is a fear of being around in open spaces with other people, count as a central symptom, that fear of social interaction and that need to socially isolate. Some of the most effective treatments work on challenging those beliefs, working out what the difficulties are, and helping someone to overcome that fear, helping the condition and also decreasing the social isolation. Now, down the more severe end of the mental health spectrum, social interaction plays a crucial part too. There's a model of psychosis posited by Freeman that suggests it's a real integral point in the formation of psychosis and delusion. Imagine for a moment that you're sitting here when you see or you hear something unexplained, a whisper in your ear, a shadow across the front of your face. Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons why this happens right now, but there's certain predisposing factors. We believe they might be biological, psychological, social, a mixture of all three. But you'll be more or less likely, due to these factors, to infer some sort of causality, to feel like that happened for a reason. It wasn't random, it wasn't sort of anomalous experience, that happened because of something. Now, imagine that you're sitting here on your own. There's no one here to bounce off your hypotheses, for them to say, no, I think it was nothing, don't worry about it. And if you've got that explanation of causality sitting there about to take hold, and there's no one to stop it from doing that, then it's more likely to take hold. And this is the formation of a delusional belief. Now, delusional beliefs are not experienced by that many people, but when they are, you've got to understand that it's not just a kind of passing sensation, it's a passing feeling. It is a belief sitting there in your brain alongside all of the other things that you believe. It's unshakable, and it elicits the same emotional reactions, that same fear, that same passion, whatever it might be, as anything else that you believe. And so you can imagine that if you believe that the reason that unexplained event happened is because someone or something is out to get you, which is what we know as a persecutory delusion, then you're going to feel scared, you're going to feel suspicious of other people, and you're going to start isolating yourself still further. We can see here that social interaction and mental health, it's not just a kind of one causes the other. There's vicious cycles, there's complicated mechanisms in place. And we'd love to understand more about the underlying mechanisms here. They're complicated, as I said, but it's really hard. Social factors are really changeable, they're really hard to define. If we want to do some kind of hard research where we say this causes this, we need to take away as many of the extraneous variables, those things that might get in the way, as possible. So in a social interaction, you'd want, say, an actor having the same conversation with all of the different participants. But that won't work. The actor's own experiences will mean that their social cues will be different for each person. So we can't say that what the participant experienced is entirely subjective to them. Now, what about if we could? There's new advances in virtual reality technology that are allowing us to create really quite convincing virtual reality environments and avatars, which are allowing us to kind of create a naturalistic environment for a social interaction, but without having that danger that the actor will react differently to different people. My thesis is doing just this. So I'm working with people with persecutory delusions, that worry that someone or something is out to cause you harm, and I'm seeing how they react to someone called Mark, who's an avatar. He's a virtual flatmate, and they're having a pleasant conversation about whether they might like to share a flat. Now, this is designed to be a fairly typical social interaction, but we can see from the way that people choose to respond to Mark, how close they get to him, and various other factors, as well as measures of social isolation, just how they're interacting, and understand more about the mechanisms behind psychosis. Virtual reality is also being used to treat mental health difficulties. Leff at UCL pioneered a new treatment for hearing voices called avatar therapy. So, in most typical therapies, when you're helping someone who's hearing voices, you work with them to understand the meaning of the voices, you work with them to challenge the distress that is attached to them. You do lots of things, but then that person is left to deal with it themselves. They have to act inwardly on themselves. In avatar therapy, it goes one step further. People create avatars which are literal visual representations of the voices in their heads. It allows other people as well to see just how real they are, and they can be very varied, often looking quite benign, often looking terrifying. And then the therapist, after they've gone over the techniques and the ways that they can deal with the voices, goes into another room, and they actually become the voice. They use voice modification software, and they move the avatar and manipulate it, allowing that person to take on those principles and those ideas and challenge the voice directly, face to face, quite literally. That also allows the person to see it working. They start to see their voices decline. They start to see that they actually do have more control over them. The pilot phase of this had remarkable results. People were reporting decreases in intensity and frequency of voices, but also, and potentially more importantly, I would say, saying that the power that the voices had over them and the distress it was causing was significantly decreased as well. Now, virtual reality is an amazing technology. It's got so many possibilities. However, I don't believe that it should be used to just sort of immerse people in a world where they can practice social interactions all the time. It's not a substitute for real life. It doesn't provide you with company. For that, when we need to help people, we need social interventions. Now, I worked for a while on something called the Connecting People study. This was research looking at raising social capital. Now, social capital is a bit like economic capital, in that it describes the value of something. But for social capital, it's the value of someone's networks. if you are feeling a bit unwell, but you need to go to the shops, is there someone that you could call upon to ask you? How about if you are on a bike ride and your chain breaks? Without Googling the nearest bike repair shop, is there someone that you know that could help? You'll all be increasing your social capital today by meeting lots of other people in the room. Social capital places a value on these connections, and it allows us to measure the increase or decrease over time in quite a tangible fashion. And it's perhaps unsurprising that people with mental health difficulties tend to have lower levels of social capital, lower access to these resources than the general population. The Connecting People study took existing good practice from lots of different NHS agencies, social care, things like that, and formed an intervention, a treatment, using these ideas. I'll use a bit of a case study to illustrate my point. So, we've got Kush. Kush is a man in his 40s. He's got persistent persecutory delusions, so that idea that something's out to get him. And for Kush, it's the fact that the people on his street are out to cause him harm. That's meaning he's staying indoors a lot, he's isolating, he's not wanting to talk to people. And then we've got Ralph, who's his recovery worker. He's at the local mental health team, and he's using the Connecting People intervention. Ralph and Kush meet, but rather than just talking about what's wrong with Kush, they also talk about the things they have in common. So they talk about the fact they actually love a shared love of fitness. Now, Ralph takes this and runs with it, quite literally. He goes to the local gym, and he helps Kush to attend it with him. Once Kush starts feeling comfortable, Kush finds he's got a new social network of gym buddies. He's increased his social capital. But again, the principles of the Connecting People study suggest that it's not just a linear process. It's not just Kush and Ralph do one thing and that's the end. Ralph carries on. Ralph starts to increase his own social capital. He starts thinking about how can he make Kush get more out of his life. And together they join a local running club. And again, along the principles of the Connecting People intervention, we see that Kush and Ralph are not using the same particularly strict boundaries that you see with a clinician and a client normally. They ran a 5K together the other weekend. The Connecting People study has had really good success, with people reporting increased levels of social capital across all study sites. The principles are now being used internationally, in India and in Sierra Leone, where they're being used to reunite communities and individuals who've been torn apart by Ebola. And now we come closer to home. In our borough of Wandsworth, the 2012 council statistics showed that we had the highest level of common mental health difficulties out of all of the London boroughs. That's things like depression, anxiety. Moreover, we also had the highest level of severe mental health difficulties. That's things like bipolar and psychosis of all of the southwest London boroughs. There's a clear need to do something about this, and it really bothered me. I was working clinically with people of around my age, but they were really socially isolated. So I did something about it. In 2012, I set up the SW18 Club. It's based from Wandsworth and Westminster Mind, and is for 18 to 35-year-olds who feel socially isolated due to their mental health. We meet every couple of weeks, and in practice, we're pretty much entirely activity-focused. We decide as a group what we want to do, and have the mantra of anything within reason is worth a try. So far, we've done things like indoor rock climbing, yoga, we've been not performed in stand-up, although who knows. We've been to the gym, we've gone and learnt counselling skills, really anything that people want to try. Once someone gets into the group and feels socially confident, we encourage them to take an active role. And if they find or learn a skill that they really enjoy, we work with them to foster it. Here, the social capital element comes in again. We'll link them in with voluntary opportunities, we'll try and get them references for work, and we'll sometimes just join them up with teams or like-minded individuals in the local area. The SW18 Club has been running now for over 3 years with no formal funding whatsoever. We have small injections of cash for things like, I don't know, meals at an open evening, but it really is a grassroots organisation. It's grown from just 3 members when I started it up to, I think there's around 45 or 48 on our books now. And from what I understand, it's doing a really good job. People really value it. There are more and more organisations like this popping up all over London, both to cover the gaps in care that are inevitable due to the statutory cuts, but also to innovate, to think of new ways of creatively helping people. And this is where you guys come in. I'm hoping that, if I haven't spoken too quickly, over the last 15 minutes or so, I've made it clear that social interaction helps with mental health difficulties, and social isolation is a bad thing. It's not rocket science. However, we so often overlook these factors, these quite obvious premises, in favour of newer, more innovative, technical interventions in some way. Yet there is a need for this as well. Perhaps you're a local business. Maybe you have an interest in helping out with something like the SW18 Club or other organisations. We've had so much support from local organisations, helping us to afford things that might have been beyond the premise of an average Tuesday evening for our members. Also, you may be able to link up with some of our members. You might be able to offer them opportunities in work, help them feel more socially connected, and get that vocational sense of achievement too. Maybe your friends or your family have experience of mental health difficulties, or you yourself have. Urge your friends and family and yourself to get connected, whether that be through formal means like support groups, or informal means just like talking to people. Perhaps you're interested in setting up an organisation yourself, like the SW18 Club, or helping out at one. Bear in mind that any sort of social interaction is great. It doesn't matter what it is. So if you've got a passion for something, however bizarre it is, then chances are your enthusiasm will get other people wanting to be involved and get that social interaction going. Keeping these links is really important. It helps us keep it top of mind in organisations and agencies to get them carrying on doing this sort of work. It provides funding for outcomes research, which isn't just simple symptom reduction, like here's a measure on a depression scale now, here's a measure on a depression scale at the end of treatment. It goes beyond that. It looks at soft outcomes, like well-being. It also provides funding for things like the virtual reality research, which allows us to really see the nitty-gritty, the details of exactly how social interaction can help with mental health. It also pushes funders, commissioners, and policymakers to think where they're going to put their pots of money. And in my opinion, although I'm training to be a psychologist, there's a massive reason and need for professionals. There's also a reason and need for other people who can do these sorts of things in a very humanistic and holistic way. But my most important message to you this morning really is this. I just urge you to connect with other people, because you never know how much good you could be doing someone by simply having a chat. Thank you.